Distilling alcohol has been around for 1,000 years. It all started with medicinal elixirs for healing the body and illnesses. And many of the same liqueurs that were used back then are still around today. But we are still discovering and producing alcohol in new ways and combining them to create unique and interesting flavors. On any given day, someone can make a cocktail that's never been tried or tasted before. There's no doubt about that a distiller needs to understand the basics about chemistry and physics. Pressure, heat, different elements and variables. All these things you taste every time you take a sip of a spirit. But nowhere have I ever seen such a level of detail and genius on display as at Whidbey Island Distillery. Steve is a retired aerospace engineer. He's bringing an incredible technological approach to distilling spirits.
The thing about this still is that it's what you call high aspect ratio. It's small diameter and tall. That's what gives you high proof.
Are you the only one that's doing these stills here?
Yeah.
This way?
Yeah.
This is the only one that exists in the whole world?
Yes. The principle is that we distill continuously without using live steam to heat up the feed wash. And what happens is if you start it just right, at the right speed, and you start slowly putting your feed in, it'll just start evaporating and heating as it goes down the column.
Is it under pressure?
No pressure. That's a really cool thing about it. It's atmospheric. In fact, we have on the bottom of the stills, we just have a loop, just like a plumber's loop like you have in your sink. So it's cooling that little spot there that pulls off the alcohol, and it's raising its boiling point. So it becomes less likely to boil. From the first time I turned it on, I had 190 proof alcohol coming out of the still, and I'd never seen that out of my still before.
Almost everything you see here was built and designed in-house. These small stills run day and night for as long as 3 months, slowly producing alcohol that will go into the rye whiskey or liqueur. This is something very few people on this planet can do. They can build it, but they cannot operate it.
This one here is pretty simple. It's a preheater, because when we put in our feed to the top of the tower, it could be really cold if it's coming from outside or whatever. So it just sets the temperature right there. So we always know what the temperature is there. And it's usually, we want it pretty cool being the top of the column. And then there's this down here. Again, there's a preheater here, which in this case, we're feeding the feed in at this point right here. So it has to heat that up, and then it goes into here. And this is a degasser. Wine and beer both have a lot of dissolved carbon dioxide in them, and we have to get that out. So we heat it up before it goes in here, and it's just sort of like, hot beer coming out of there, right? And the CO2 comes out of the top, and then the degas liquid is fed into the still and trickles down through it like that.
So we're gonna make the Bunker Rye mash. So it's 51% rye and 49% malted barley from Skagit Valley Malting. So it's not really a step mash, it's a ramp. So we're gonna put the grain into the mash tun at a certain temperature. And we're gonna start basically at a protein rest, a lot of protein in rye, so we're gonna break that down. And then we're gonna get up to our beta rest, where basically the enzymes are converting the starch into sugar.
So we're brewing a beer?
Yeah. It's a little bit different. We're not gonna boil, because obviously the still is gonna take care of that. And but we do sparge it off. We're not gonna ferment on the grain, so very much like a beer.
Jonathan takes the barley and the rye. He puts it into this small milling machine. He crushes it so it comes out like a powder. And this mix here is called the malt. This term, handcrafted, it's really on display here, as Jonathan literally mixes the batch with his bare hands.
Okay, so
Oh, it smells good.
oh yeah, so there's the rolled rye, and then in between all that, because I've mixed it together, is kind of the milled stuff. You see the barley's broken down, and then you have the nice husk. So see how it almost looks like it's still, a lot of them look like they're still together, but if you touch them, they just fall apart. So you've got these nice husks, and they act as a filter bed because we're going to be pumping the wort through a Herms coil to heat it up kind of gently in this hot water over here instead of putting flame on it and charring the grains.
Jonathan is using an enzyme to help break down the starches to convert it into sugar. He then takes the malted barley and the rolled rye and puts it into the warm water. It's like making rye bread.
Yeah.
If you didn't have all that husk in it, you can use it for bread.
Well, you know.
In the beginning, Jonathan stirs the mash to prevent air bubbles, so the mash doesn't clump together. You have to think of this as tea. Everything has to be submerged. Once Jonathan is ready, he will begin slowly to increase the pressure and the flow of the coil-heated water into the pot. Once this is done, he seals the lid and allows the organic matter to take over.
So we have a dedicated partnership now with Skagit Valley Malting. They provide us with all of the grains that we use to make our bunker rye whiskey. It's a similar story to ours, where they took traditional process and kind of turned it up on its heels.
But you could actually have your own grain,
Delivered
to them.
Yep.
They will have it in a closed environment and then bring it back to you,
Yes.
malted, finished, ready to go.
Yeah.
So they can do what they're doing good at, and you can do what you're good at.
Exactly. What makes your whiskey whiskey is that you're brewing and fermenting grains, but the grains you use determine your style. Rye is a bold flavor. It's spicy, it's peppery, and we love it, but we don't want to overwhelm you with that. Ours is a little more toned down, and sometimes I describe it like a single malt meets a rye as a whiskey flavor. The final layer flavor for whiskey is oak. And we do a non-traditional aging process to keep it consistent on a small craft level, and then we do a traditional barrel aging as well. So yeah, these are our traditional aging barrels. So again, it's white American oak. The barrels are fire roasted to our specification on the inside. We fill them with whiskey, and then we're patient.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just coming up on 2 years on our first 2 barrels. These guys down here, you can see we're pretty excited about filling them up.
There's some handprints on them.
Yep. I think there's me right there.
Oh, cool.
And then, but everyone put their thumbprint on them. It was a long journey for us to get to this point. Like I said, we don't just make something, throw it in a barrel, and cross our fingers. We really want to know where we're going with whiskey, and this is just the last layer. If we've gotten everything right up to this point, we know it's only going to get better with time as it sits in the oak
Time,
press.
yeah.
So, tell us, you'd like me to make you a cocktail with our wonderful
No.
I thought today we would make our rye rosemary berry lemonade. So when we first opened up the distillery, the idea was just to make vodkas and whiskeys, and the local population quickly spoke out and said there used to be a loganberry liqueur made on the island by Chateau Saint Michel, and it would be wonderful if you could create another loganberry liqueur. It also happened at that time that we were able to get some bulk wine from the island because people needed, the wineries needed distillate for fortifying. So we thought, well, a great thing to practice distilling on would be wine. So we distilled wine into neutral spirits. Half goes back to the wineries, and we use the other half to create our liqueurs. The number one thing I wanted was to have that just plucked berry taste. I've had lots of liqueurs and berry liqueurs, and you always get that medicinal taste to it that kind of tastes like cough syrup sometimes, and that the goal was to have a really fine berry liqueur that the star of it is the fruit. Normally something that's better for the bigger distilleries is not necessarily good for us. We just really want to continue on the focus of crafting handcrafted spirits and not feel pressured by the rest of the groups. what I like about here is everyone that shows up for a tasting is happy. We don't have any unhappy people coming through here.
There's many unique things being done here. These techniques and stills, one could argue, are one of a kind. And these liqueurs, using local flavors and berries, are unique to this island. It's another example of people looking to our past traditions, recipes, knowledge, and applying them to our current world in a new, exciting way. It's showing that bigger is not always better, and some of the most interesting flavors can come from a few rooms and a handful of people.